November 7 at the Armory as the location for our next update. For those of you that are new to this and are trying to get in on the ground floor, I'm going to go through this very quickly. We all agree that the really good news is that the city of Newburgh's drinking water has never been this clean in at least the last 50 years.
Yeah, because we're not getting it from here.
Presently, we are drawing our water off the Catskills Aqueduct. After a series of events that occurred earlier in the year, first with meetings from Department of Health officials, both at the state and county levels, it was apparent to my entire team, from the engineering department, to the fire department, to the water department, to the DPW department, and the legal department, that we had a problem. And so once I Googled what PFOS was, it was really apparent that there seemed to be just information all over the board in terms of what the proper threshold presented a moral dilemma as well as a professional one for many of us on the staff that frankly didn't last too long when we realized that we, luckily, as the city of Newburgh, have readily available alternative water sources. And so on May 1st of this year, I declared an emergency to mobilize both state agency action as well as local action to switch over to Browns Pond. We had been working on it for a number of weeks before that, teams around the clock, to install the mechanisms, the pumps, and the other equipment that already existed at our pump house but needed to be upgraded. Shortly thereafter, we discovered that Browns Pond was draining at such a level that it was starting to threaten the aquaculture, amphibious life forms, and others in the lake, in the pond. And fortunately for us, our team has been working with the state and New York City DEP to switch over to the Catskills Aqueduct. And because we're drawing off the Catskills Aqueduct, I'm able to represent to the community that this is some of the best water the city of Newburgh has had. It's come through a lot of teamwork and a lot of cooperation, a lot of uncomfortable conversations, but ones that were necessary as we all grappled with this new phenomenon in this modern era of the contamination. Terminology such as contaminants, emerging contaminants, known contaminants, unidentified contaminants. At the Senate hearings in Albany recently, they were described as a galaxy of contaminants, both known and unknown, that in one way or another are impacting all of us. And as they emerge in the scientific literature, laboratory studies, it is very safe to say that in the modern era we live in, not only the city of Newburgh, but everywhere else there's a fresh water source that is downhill from a contaminating source, there is going to be this problem. And so at the end of this discussion, we're going to talk about how we go forward. And I'm almost thinking it's time to talk about it very quickly at the beginning. In trying to explain what a watershed is, I have struggled, and I've always struggled to explain it even to my own family. And so I've utilized the standard of speaking to my 5-year-old son in explaining what is a watershed. So I'm holding up a funnel, and at the base of the funnel is Lake Washington. Inside the funnel contains parts of the town of Newburgh, parts of the town of New Windsor, Stewart Airport, the intersection of I-84 and I-87, the big warehouse that's now being constructed at the top, Patton Brook that runs along the side of the funnel from that area towards our water source at the bottom, and a lot of other very, very impressive economic development that has happened in the region. The problem, however, is that as water goes downhill, and by the way, the highest elevation is Stewart Airport, which is approximately 150 feet above Washington Lake at the bottom. Whatever goes on inside this funnel, guess what? It comes downhill. And so if I were to find an overarching metaphor for how we can maybe harness the discussion this evening, it's to talk about how did we get here, what can we do to change, and how can we move forward in a way that is able to assure our community that we have clean drinking water. The biggest challenge we have right now is keeping up with the events. Many of you may notice that on Route 300 there are a number of very, very tall tanks that are being erected just north of Route 207. I could never have said these words before now or know what they even mean, but as we try to filter out the perfluorooctane sulfonate in our water, the granular activated carbon filtration system you see there is going to play an important part. That is only a temporary measure that you see at Washington Lake. That is so that we can reduce the water that is in Washington Lake down to manageable levels. It's a high hazard Class C dam. Since we turned off Washington Lake, we have no longer been able to draw the water, which means that as it rains, as it's a spring fed and also collecting the water on top, as well as from the watershed, it filled up. We had to close our diversion gate to slow down the pace at which the lake was filling up. But we still had a challenge that I'm thankful to Mr. Brand and his engineering team at the DEC. They got right on this work and basically have provided us with a portable granular activated carbon filtration system so that as we drain the contaminated PFOS water that is Lake Washington right now, we're not going to now pollute the town of New Windsor. In other words, we're not going to have what happened to us 150 feet above at the airport to be poisoning the town of New Windsor. We're trying to be good neighbors, and it's really the only way we're able to afford to do that is with the rapid response from the New York DEC. And I want to especially thank Mr. Brand for the quick response and the entire team. I took great comfort in learning that it wasn't only my summer and holiday season that was completely wiped out. But we're going to work forward so that we can do things at a more reasonable, logical pace. There's a lot of other issues down the road that we're going to need to address. For example, while we now have this, I believe it might be drawing down as early as this evening, the water levels, the freeboard levels in Washington Lake, and as it comes out in the Silver Stream through the granular activated carbon filters, at the end of it, we're going to have a clean water that we can send down the stream. There's still a problem at Brett Pond, which is just below where the contamination we believe is coming from. It was measured recently at 5,900 parts per trillion for PFOS. That water, as of the moment, is still coming down Silver Stream. But we're confident that as we have this technology available to lower the freeboard in Washington Lake, it may also be the same technology that is employed so that we can maybe divert altogether a continuing source of contamination through Silver Stream and down into the Moodna Creek. For those of us that don't know this in our sleep, EPA health advisories, which warned us about PFOS and lowered the threshold from 200 parts per trillion down to 70 parts per trillion from 200 parts per trillion, based on the best available peer-reviewed studies of the effects on PFOS on laboratory animals. Had a resident of the city of Newburgh recently send me a message that told me, so at the end of the day, we're extrapolating data that utilized on the fatty tissue of laboratory mice to determine the health impacts on residents. And the answer is yes. And we are also informed by epidemiological studies of human populations that have been exposed by PFOS as well. These studies indicate that exposure to PFOS over certain levels may result in adverse health effects, including development effects to fetuses during pregnancy or to breastfed infants, such as low birth weight, accelerated puberty, skeletal variations, cancer, including testicular cancer, kidney cancers, liver effects such as tissue damage, and immune effects. For example, antibody production and immunity, thyroid effects, and other effects such as cholesterol changes. So when we talk in a little bit, I believe Senator Larkin alluded to good news. Not only would we be able to perhaps answer question marks about how this has impacted our own health, particularly those residents that have lived in our community and consumed the water for the last number of decades, but this very data may also serve to feed a national database that can tell us what are the other effects. Should we be followed long-term to study what other impacts are available to us? Is it possible, since it's a very expensive undertaking, that we just do a statistically relevant sample to begin with, say a population of 300, maybe some that have lived here for many, many decades, others that are new arrivals, perhaps as a control group, some for mothers that are concerned about their children and fathers who are concerned about our children. We have an engineer in our own department whose wife drank the PFOS contaminated water during both of her pregnancies, and her children just gestated, and there's many question marks. So we could pick out representative samples and let's just do the science based on 300 and then make decisions based on that. So that's something that we're very excited in possibly hearing some updates about. The other issues really relate to the money, and as recently as today, true to Mr. Brand's word, we received indication that he has presented our spreadsheet, both in terms of actual costs and anticipated costs, that we are going to hopefully be reimbursed for. As many of you know, the city of Newburgh operates on very thin margins, and so the monies that we have expended so far in this crisis are very real to us. And at the end of the day, what we want to be able to do is switch back to Washington Lake, have a clean Washington Lake, have a new regulatory model that enables us going forward to start identifying contamination sources earlier, even with regard to the new big warehouse at 84 and 87, to find a way, if we can, to salvage Patton Brook so that it's a critical part of that water line that comes down the funnel into our watershed. And we really want, at the end of the day, for the community to be at peace, that whatever health effects may be impacting their lives, we're able to speak to a logical course going forward on what is the best practices and the best science going forward. We stand ready and available to offer any community resources, including our facilities, to any testing agencies, any testing laboratories. We believe that it's going to require the local pediatricians and other physicians to become schooled in this area. I have a relative in my own family, a pediatric oncologist, that simply says, I don't have the answer. This is something that we have to learn. And as the entire state of New York grapples with this problem, so does the nation. We're not here to find the bad guys or the villains in the room. We are here to understand that we are still paying the deferred costs for the Industrial Revolution. And we probably will, and our children will, and grandchildren, for a very long time. And so, to the extent we can work in this community this evening to develop the next unit of work, the next leg of the journey, it's going to be very important for us. And I want to thank you.